I want to thank you for taking the time to join this afternoon's webinar. We hope you will enjoy this one on IPA for supply chain. We have two wonderful presenters here today. With that, I hope you enjoy this. Stephanie Kowal, Mr. Jeremy Stoltzfus.
All right.
Just a little bit about us. We are a full-service in-for loss and delivery partner. We specialize in technical, supply chain, human resources, and finance. Full loss and product suite, here to help you with whatever you may need.
So on today's agenda, going through a lot of topics here. We're really going to start off talking about some automating supply chain processes using IPA. We're going to talk through scheduling and distributing report runs. Then we're going to get into talking through some specialty flows, so sort of a little bit more advanced, not so much out of the box, talking through some processes that maybe not as common. And then we're going to go through our bonus area for contract management. So first off, pretty much the number one process flow in supply chain is requisition approvals. We still find a lot of organizations actually don't have one implemented, and you may still be going through utilizing paper to send some of your requests through, maybe for your special items. So we definitely recommend this, a really great place to start. It can be very implemented very simply. Infor offers a delivered process flow for you to work off of. However, your processes often require this flow to be pretty heavily customized in some instances, right? Because you have your own specific processes that maybe certain departments have different approval levels, or maybe a certain type of request like service needs to go through a different process. We'd also recommend, as part of building out this process flow, that you take certain processes into mind, like if there's some sort of error in the flow, it's going to a different team to help monitor that, right? So perhaps the flow is going off of your HR structure, and then it's connecting that to your account unit, and perhaps there's no structure assigned for that particular account unit. What's going to happen with that requisition? It was built in GL, so it's letting them process, but it has no one to go to for approval. So what are some ways that we can go about helping that process?
Yeah, and a way to think about this is, looking at utilizing timeout within process automation. I've worked with organizations that keep their requisition approvals to a very tight timeline, and they have to be approved within a certain amount of time. So if that first level approver or any of the levels of approvers don't get to it in time, it will escalate maybe to the supply chain folks, to the buyers or the purchasing team that handles that and kind of oversees those processes. And then it gives them the ability to override an approval, sometimes documenting it with, you can tie it to a document imaging system and all of that stuff to capture all of that information.
Yep, we've also seen some instances where, I'm sure everyone has a story where maybe a requester wasn't paying attention and put a decimal in the wrong spot, and they submitted this, crazy expensive requisition, which, they didn't mean to do. They could learn from their own mistake once it goes to their supervisor for $1 million or whatever, but maybe you want to have a different queue in place that for certain types of requests, like specials and services, it goes to the buyer first for them to kind of approve the request, maybe even value analysis, and then once they say, this purchase is approved by supply chain, go ahead and route it up through the fiscal approval. Okay. Another one that we find really, really helpful is just new user additions. So I'm sure you all know the story, right? You get a new person coming into your organization, and they're also going to be a requester, and maybe they're also, it's a new department being built for your organization. And what are all those different departments and screens? And there's so much to do, right? So how have we seen that?
Yeah, so this one's really kind of a big win for numerous areas in your organization, certainly for the supply chain folks, but IT as well, because they're the ones typically on the back end that have to assign the additional security that's required for requisitions and other things like that. But then also for the requesters themselves, if this is an automated process, it just goes through that much faster rather than passing around that paper form. There are some challenges with it. In Ford, we need to somehow come up with that front end request form. So some folks have used Design Studio if that's available to you. There are certainly other ways to capture that data via a form and pass it into IPA for an approval flow. And then have that account automatically be generated if necessary, automatically assign the security role, automatically create the RQ04 record. Of course, it can go to a supervisor for approval before any of that happens then as well.
Yeah, so that's huge. I mean, I've helped a lot of organizations through assessment processes to walk through all this, and you see a lot of back and forth between this request form maybe starting with supply chain, they send it to the end user fills it out, it goes to IT, they add their piece, and it goes to supply chain, they add their piece, and then give it back to IT to add that certain identity to the user. So this can really save a lot of time for you. So we definitely recommend looking into speeding up this process. Another huge win is automating month-end close. So this is another one that has a lot of back and forth, and especially if you are a multi-company organization, I'm sure you've felt this pain, right? Where you have these multi-step jobs with all of your different companies, and you have to manually go in there and change the parameters, whether it's you're changing the period to the next period, or you're determining what the date range is for these certain reports.
Mm-hmm. Another way to handle this too is actually to go out and have the process create a brand new job, run the job, check to make sure the job's completed, and then delete the job when it's done. Your reports and everything are still there, obviously, but the job definition itself just kind of goes away. Doing some things like that, what can help to include the work unit number as a part of the job name, then you have kind of that audit trail and are able to track it down a little bit easier. I know some organizations like to keep all of their jobs that they run and just keep them as a history. So if you're doing that, that's certainly a good way, and maybe some sort of other identifier in the job name to let you know what it is.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's not even necessarily just thinking as simply as, well, it's a huge time saver to just update these jobs and run them, but what about those outputs, right? So part of month-end close is running usage reports or seeing what your spend is, and you have to go to your print manager, export to CSV or save your PDF or whatever. You can build that into your process flow to save it to your shared drive or post the results somewhere else for executives to review.
And think about the notification process too. So PO, the PO close programs they run, and then whoever's running those has to notify somebody, maybe an AP, and vice versa, and all of those other jobs that have to be run. So it's a big coordinated effort. Here you can string it all together. You can even throw in the GL jobs at the end and even have it go through user actions, so that before it goes and executes the next job, somebody looks at that output from that previous one, and they have to approve it before it moves on to the next one.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one, especially in supply chain, because there's kind of like a pre-month-end close, right? Where we're running certain jobs, see if there's open receipts. We want things to be as clean as possible so that when we're starting to run other reports after we've closed, they're accurate for that one point in time. So oftentimes what happens is one user is running this report and then they're sending it to receiving or sending it to purchasing, and this can do it automatically, right? And look to see if certain criteria is met before moving along the path. So this is a huge win. I know RPI has done a lot of projects helping organizations automate their month-end close, and it saves a whole lot of time. These next few slides are just kind of talking through some of the query steps of looking for information, and it's pretty detailed. All right.
So when we talk about scheduling and distributing reports, Landmark has a pretty sophisticated scheduler built into it, so we can use IPA, like we mentioned with the job close processes, to go out and pull those reports out, send them out. It can be interfacing to external systems as well, that data that needs to go out, items and other things like that.
Yeah, so, internally you may have some custom programs running. You may have some SQLs that run behind the scenes and trying to also even bake this into your month-end close, that now you're ready to move forward, sending your queries to other organizations. So, commonly we see benchmarking reports for vendors that are helping you report on your spend. Even freight charges for third-party freight systems that are kind of just helping you send those charges to others throughout your department and feed that back to the GL. Also just, helping with any kind of interfaces you have with other systems like your clinical system. One that I really like is, especially in supply chain, you're connected to a lot of different areas, and you're not always notified of certain things along the process, right? So GL, finance may be inactivating a GL account, but there's still open POs, or there's still open requesting locations out there. So, scheduling a query that runs and gives you that detail, or looks for certain fields that may have changed, like a vendor being inactivated, and to alert supply chain is really huge.
And of course, as you follow the life cycle, right, and it eventually ends up in accounts payable, you can set up process flow to look for certain things such as high spending. If a very large payment is being made to a particular vendor and somebody needs to be aware of that or even approve it before it happens, certain dollar amounts. You can also use the LBI's smart notification feature, but if you don't have that, you can use process automation to go out and look for those conditions and then alert and basically put a payment on hold and wait for approval at that point. Yeah. Things like nightly reports. Even I've seen ACH payments made out of AP that just every day, when that check run happens, it captures that data at the end of the night. It says, okay, the vendors, here's a report, here's a distribution report. Maybe it's a CSV file that they want to import into their systems so that they know a payment is coming and they're expecting that.
Yeah. Nice helpful summaries in some scenarios too, where you just want a snapshot of what happened in that day, or all of the jobs that are on this scheduler and whether or not they ran successfully, right? So it just depends what kind of things that you need to track in the system. There's lots of tools here to help with that. This is one that I'm really passionate about. There's a lot that we really love about MSCM that helps supply chain, especially for healthcare organizations, help manage the inventory in their locations. But there's this really frustrating thing that happens, and it's even if you have the best item master maintenance in place, what can happen is if just one thing is off, it's the first time you're adding it to your item master, you have it on an agreement, but it hasn't, it's been ordered, it hasn't yet been received, but it's already been added to a PAR location. What actually happens is the requester's scanning and they go to order it, and the one item errors out. It says, unit cost is required. And what the system does is it actually creates, it sends that information over to S3 and RQ10, but it creates an unreleased requisition. And it has every other item except for that one item that errored out. And I think the value there on Infor side is just that it gives the requester the ability to go ahead and update that requisition before they release it. But it's not something that's visible to the end user, to the requester on the handheld. They don't get an error, they don't see anything. All they know is the next day they don't have their order and they wonder what happened, right? So we've seen organizations just come up with a simple report on their dashboard or a query that's run that looks for every single requisition that's unreleased that came from the source of IC83, and that's the back-end screen that MSCM uses to create that RQ10 requisition. But we've also seen something way more complex and detailed that looks for other errors and actually notifies the users in the process. So maybe they added an item that connects to a GL account that's not activated for that account unit. Why not email finance to let them know to activate it? Or why not just have the flow activate it, add it to that unreleased requisition at the quantity that they put on the request, and then just automatically release it? So it just depends on your business process, but this is one that I would definitely recommend spending some time on to provide some value to your customers who are the requesters, to speed up the process, give them some more visibility, and also help your MMIS team kind of manage some of that. All right, another somewhat new one is over receipts and inspections, and they're not necessarily related. This is one where Infor, again, will provide you a kind of a starter flow that you can work off of, or just kind of see how they designed it and then build your own. Over receipts, number one, as part of the process, if you don't have any tolerances in place, it actually creates an over receipt buyer's message, a PO52 for the buyer. But they're not notified if you don't have a flow in place. So basically the receiver has to notice it and then reach out to the buyer, who then approves it. And then maybe they would tell the receiver again and they'd release it, and then the goods would be on their way. Doesn't really work the best, right? And there's definitely room to improve there. So even out of the box, just adding a simple notification to the buyer is really helpful. And even just adding in, once they do go ahead and approve that over receipt, to notify the receiver to go ahead and send those products along. There's also this kind of added process of inspections if these items are built for IC12. And the reason why this is a little bit different, where we've seen the need is for lab products where they need to be quality controlled by that specific department. And so basically the receiver needs some instructions once that receipt happens to just bring a subset of that product over to the department rather than this huge lot that they may be sending right back to receiving. And then notifying whoever this inspector is that there's something waiting their inspection and whether or not they're going to approve or reject it. So it's a great process in Lawson, but who you're going to be working with likely knows nothing about PO34, doesn't know much about Lawson. It's going to be super clunky. So what can you do to make it easier, right? You can utilize IPA for that and send them an email notification and give them some buttons to answer that inspection request. Something really helpful to look into as part of the over receipts and also the inspections process. All right.
So now we're going to talk about contract management. So contract management, one of the big things that we see is approval of those contracts. So we can build that in. It's a service that's defined. Of course, contract management being a landmark application now. The process automation is built into the application and it's core to how the application works. So contract approval flow is initiated when that contract is released, and you can go through and build out multiple approval levels, whatever meets your business need.
Yeah, so pretty similar to rec approvals in a sense of maybe how you want to structure out how the system's finding who this contract relates to and sending it off for that approval. But you may be looking at different things. There may be some other documents that you want to attach. Out of the box, contract management comes with several canned flows. One very simply is just contract approval. It's a yes, no, pretty simple. There's also approvals with redlining that actually is like a Word document going back and forth, and the system will track all that for you. There's also contracts that require negotiation with the supplier. So it'll actually go through supplier portal and route to whoever the supplier contact is. And another one is contract management also can have a terms and conditions library. And oftentimes you have one person managing that, right? So if anyone goes in and modifies a term that was created from the library and they make a tweak to it, maybe you want to send it to someone to just verify whatever they modified in that term is acceptable before the contract is released. So definitely a lot of cool stuff that you can do. Is there much difference between building these flows for Landmark versus LSF?
The only difference is really that you're making calls against the Landmark data. So instead of the S3 loss and query node, there's one specific for Landmark transactions. So you have to understand the business classes in Landmark and how they are associated with the data.
Okay, good to know. And this is another really cool idea if you're using contract management today, or something to keep in mind if you're looking to implement, is there's a lot of kind of utilities that are built in to help with notification to the end user. So one of those is expiration alerts, right? So as part of building the contract, you have your expiration date, and then there's a yellow and red alert, and you define what those alerts are, whether it's 30 days from the contract or 60 or 90, what have you. So those are all a part of the contract, but how does it know when to alert that end user? Out of the box, what it does is it actually, every time you run that utility, it looks to see what the expiration date, and if it's that date or less, no matter if it's sent it or not, it just keeps continually emailing the contacts, right? Mm-hmm.
So as long as it's in that range, so once it first crosses that yellow alert date and you continue to run it, say you run that process daily, your users are going to get a notice every day until then that red alert hits, and then they're going to get a red alert notice every day until it finally expires then. And even beyond that, it will continue to alert.
So that's crazy, right? There's this way too many notifications. It's like, I'm working on it, relax, right? You don't want to bother them too much because then they're just never going to work on it. It's just very overwhelming. So what can they do to maybe fix that?
So this is an example of a custom flow that was built, and it basically goes through and it looks specifically at everything that's in that alert status, and then it looks to say, okay, is today's date match the 60-day or the 30-day out for the yellow alert or the red alert, and just sends the alert on that day.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
So I think that's all we've got. I don't know if there's any questions.
Yep.
Great.
We sure have some. We struggled and decided to disable specials due to orders going straight to PO and to the vendor without us putting eyes on it.
That's no good. So,
sorry, could IPA and
yes,
requisition approval have stopped this from happening? I know you're going to give multiple.
Yes.
You're going to give them an answer, but also how does IPA play into this?
Yes. So there's lots of different things that can be done to help improve that process, right? Out of the box, if you're not running PO 100 today, or even if you are and you have that on a schedule that runs, each day, every half hour, whatever, there's certain parameter filters that you can put into place to either just process that subset of items, so you can just run it for just I type and just N type, and just not run it at all for specials, and have your buyers manually create that PO through PO 23, or you can add just way more filters there. You can do specials, but only if it came from a contract through contract management, or if it was from last PO cost, you want to allow it, but not if it's entered cost. So lots of things that you can do with PO 100 to help control that. But you also can just customize your IPA flow to maybe go to that purchasing in basket first before it actually goes to fiscal approval, or also just put them at the end. So they're a part of that general review process before it goes into PO 3, and ultimately before PO 100 runs and sends it out to the vendor.
Right. So in summary, this is a very common need that customers have, and there's a lot of ways to address it. And if you want to follow up, Ms. Stephanie Kowal would be happy to chat with you. There's a version 11 question. It's an interesting one, though. Can a requester be a non-employee? I have heard an employee record is required to be a requester. Just wondering if that was correct information. So, we played with FSM somewhat, and it does populate resource records from HCM or Global HR. And one of the interesting things is that Global HR is specifically designed so that you can track non-employee records. This is something that folks used to do in the Lost in S3 side by bastardizing the Social Security number and putting 999 and things of that nature. But now it's specifically out of the box, understands that organizations have resources with approval and management authority that are not necessarily on payroll for any variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. Anything you want to expand on that, or?
I think the only kind of, not really necessarily with FSM in mind, but at least with contract management and supplier portal in use today, which is, parts of those things are also baked into FSM, is when you're adding a contact to that supplier, it's also adding, a user record to loss and security and assigning roles from there. So like Keith was mentioning, it's taking in those additional processes into play there for non-employees, and how does that work into your organization and the Lawson system to have that make sense?
Yeah, so we don't see this as a limitation at all. Another question here. Any thoughts on requester finding out who the requisition is waiting for an approval? Can they see the history of level 1, say Bob has approved yesterday, and it's now waiting on level 2, Jane?
Great question. If you're using requisition status today as part of the RQC bookmark, there's some things that you can see in that view. So there's we have another presentation, RQC best practices, where we talk about it, and there's some screenshots in there, but it's like a organizational chart. So it's a bunch of boxes stacked on top of each other. And if you hover your mouse over it, it will let you know if, what status the contract's in and who's approved it, and if it's waiting for another level. It won't let you know who the name is of the other level if they haven't yet approved. But what we've actually seen is, as part of the process flow, it's actually writing in the requisition comment who it's gone to for approval and who it's waiting for. So it'll actually populate the name of the fiscal approval that it's waiting for. So we found that really valuable, both for the requester and also for purchasing, to be able to drill back to see, what actually happened with this rec.
Yeah, and certainly reports can be written out of the PFI metrics, which is the table in process automation that tracks the approval stuff and where it's currently sitting.
And how long it sat there too, right?
Yes.
That's a big one.
Got a question for Jeremy here. Is the automating new user addition a flow provided by Lawson or a custom development?
That is a custom developed flow.
I have a follow-up question to this, because I have had customers in the past explain to me that everybody must have a user provisioning flow. Surely you have it out of the box. You can't ask me to pay for consulting services for this. I want to know personally, why is it that we have to create a custom user provisioning flow for every single customer? Why isn't it out of the box?
It's different everywhere you go. Do you have Landmark? Do you have Global HR? Are you just running Lawson S? So there's
it's reflective
so many
of the various footprints.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, as people build these out, your security roles are going to be different. Just because I named it employee self-service doesn't mean your organization didn't name it ESS. Mm-hmm. So there's all of those things that go into building a user provisioning flow that really give it the power to just fully automate that user account creation.
But we consistently do see that it is one of the most impactful IPA flows that you can develop, and most organizations that do have some level of IPA sophistication do have some level of user provisioning flow throughout. We are running into an issue with inactivating the item from an IC12 location and resourcing it when that IC12 location is used in the header at IC81. Thus, we have been forced to keep it active in that location. thoughts on how to get around this? You want me to reread that?
Yeah,
I don't
one
know
more
if I
time.
fully kept track of that.
My brain's going there.
Yeah. So we are running into an issue with inactivating an item from an IC12 location and re-sourcing it when that IC12 location is used in the header at IC81.
So I'm not sure if I'm understanding correctly, but I'm going to give it my best shot. And if not, please follow up with me and I'll try again. So from what I'm understanding, the item maybe once was in inventory, but now you actually want to make it non-stock, and that's causing some sort of error. We find that it actually has to be activated, just that inventory tracking is switched to no instead of yes, and that will assist in the process. But I'm also not sure if what you're talking about is the from location, who you have set up as who the PAR is going to source from, which it's actually pulling from IC02 for the IC12 that was built. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I'd be happy to help you troubleshoot if you send me an email.
Perfect. Have you explored the idea of using process flows to link a new Lawson item created in S3 to an existing contract management special type item?
No, but that's interesting. There are utilities that really need to be run in contract management to help some of those things stay in sync. But if I understand your question correctly, maybe you have the full contract built in contract management, but maybe you're not allowing the specials to flow over into the agreement, which then your requesters wouldn't be able to purchase it. So maybe you're running some usage and then kind of trying to tie things together from there. There's some really cool things that contract management does to help with that process. You certainly could create a flow that looks for that though, and make some updates. There's just a lot of
probably a lot of steps involved. I mean,
Yes.
basically whatever you can, if it's a process that you go through and you query certain tables in S3 and then you query those tables in Landmark and look at that data, you can pull all that in and do the data compares and all of that. It's probably a lot of work and a lot of steps, but it can certainly be done.
Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I want to thank Stephanie and Jeremy.